सही गया, थोड़ा सा वो ट्रांजिशन तो हो ही गया, वो तो अब गया। वही प्रॉब्लम हुई थी, आवाज़ ज़्यादा होती है, शोर ज़्यादा बचता है, तो अब ज़्यादा लेट टाइम पे जितना ज़्यादा लोगे, जितना ज़्यादा लोगे आप जहन पे उतना ही लगाया गया है, कुछ आ गया तो अलहमदिल्ला शुरू जाएगा, पॉजिटिव रहना चाहिए, पॉजिटिव माइंड। और आप कल ज्वाइन किया आपने अपनी आप अप्लाई करेंगे?
Being held at JN Medical College, AMU. We are beginning with this session with the keynote lectures. To chair this session, may I invite Professor Shahid Ali Siddiqui sir, Head Department of Radiotherapy, JN Medical College. He is specialized in radiation oncology and his interests are in radiation oncology and chemotherapy. I welcome you sir from the organizing members of ISRPT 2017. Please sir. Next person to chair this session is Dr. Mohsin Raza. Dr. Mohsin Raza is senior consultant and general surgeon with 44 years of experience. He is just like a father figure for this university, for all of us. And he is the group director and facilitator of breast cancer awareness among Indian women. And he is involved with many NGOs and he is working throughout day and night for the welfare of AMU Slum Society. I welcome you, sir. Please. Speakers for this session, Dr. Vidit Datta, Dr. Mohammad Zehran Saipillai and Dr. Maqsood Punekar also to come on the dais. Welcome, sir. Our speakers for the keynote lectures.
At the outset, I would like to express my thanks and gratitude to the Department of Pharmacology and the organizers of this conference for giving us an opportunity to chair this session. And to start the conference, there is a keynote address which is to be delivered by Dr. Vinit Datta, who is an alumnus of this university and a class fellow of Dr. Ziaur Rahman also. So he has done his MD in medicine from JN Medical College and thereafter he is working as a head of Datar Cancer Genomics Limited, New Delhi. And now I request Dr. Vinit Datta to kindly come forward to deliver the keynote.
and the conference organizers, thank you for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to come back here to Aligarh and to our university and see how it's growing and flourishing. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to just share with you my experience of where we are and where we're heading on the cancer side. I know that the subsequent speakers will also be talking a little bit about where we are as a country with regards to some of the risk factors and the other structures that are involved within the process, but I'm going to very briefly come back and share with you that as a country, we've pretty much changed the mainstream of looking at over-focusing on the infectious scope of health for the country. We've been tackling the TB and the polios and the rest of the infections within the system, and we've overemphasized the burden of cardiovascular disease. And we really haven't focused on how much oncology and lack of cancer care, both in terms of quality and quantity, affects us as a country and as a nation. This is what we're grappling with today. And at times when we see what kind of developments other parts of the world have made within that system, we are far, far behind. Even as a country, I think there have been improvements, and they've largely been focused on improving cancer care programs in the country. It's been looking at adopting new medical technologies within some of those mainstream systems. But predominantly the challenge and the problem that relates is all on awareness and basic education. And some of these are so easily preventable within those mainstreams that it's really basic lack of addressing some of those risk factors, whether it's to do with addictions like tobacco and all its associations with head and neck. And one of the reasons why it doesn't find a lot of mainstream adoption within the private structures and systems is obviously because of the fact that the population that is being addressed by the system is from the poor socioeconomic strata. So it's not enough of value in terms of, from a business sense, for many of the private healthcare facilities and private parties within that system. I'm not going to go into the challenges of pollution. I'm sure you've read enough about what Delhi's been grappling with, but to have 13 out of 20 of the most polluted countries or cities in the world to be within India is itself a challenge, and I don't think we're very, very clear or very much aware in terms of what are going to be those challenges that come across in our subsequent generations. There are enough studies already out of Delhi which are telling you pockets of bronchial asthma that has risen by over 700% in the last about 10 years. And these are again pockets of studies and isolated studies that are coming into the system. Again, with the lifestyle, we've been focusing too much on the adult, and we know for a fact that children and school-going and adolescents have a similar issue. Various studies look at anywhere between 25 to 40% of children in urban areas actually having a high BMI, and these are school and college-going people within that system. So as we look at really some of the challenges that are coming across for us, the numbers itself are a problem. And one of the problems with the numbers is we don't know the numbers. We don't have standard registries across the system. The registries are all in isolation. So hospitals will have some of their own numbers, some of the public health figures will have their own numbers, but these are largely, these are best guess estimates. We don't really know. And the problems that we face, especially as we move out from the urban areas to the semi-urban or to the rural areas, then the problem is that these numbers again are very, very conservative. These are broad estimations, and largely we believe the numbers are going to be much, much more within those systems, and those numbers are equivalent to the entire populations in some of the European countries within that system. And as we move across, this incidence is only going to grow. Not because we're getting more and more, because we're now identifying more and more, we're diagnosing more and more within that process. And one of the interesting questions that always comes across when we're having some of these discussions within the system is as well, how does it relate to what happens if we screen more? And I think Raza Saab has been involved very, very actively, and God bless him with all the activities that he's been trying to raise. But my fundamental problem with that process again is the fact that if we screen more, if we detect more, how will we treat more? We don't even have currently today enough of infrastructure to manage and treat some of those systems in play. If you look at where we are with some of those screening numbers, those numbers are appalling. Compared to, let's say, the United Kingdom, where I trained, where the numbers would be almost double the number of early onset diagnostics that we determine, let's say, for breast cancer. Whereas here, we've got largely when we're diagnosing patients, these are extremely late stage. And then rather than looking at curative, we're really looking at limiting disease progression and fighting the terminal or the pre-terminal battle within that system. The screening area, especially when we look at things like, for example, breast cancer, when we look at cervical cancer, again, there's been a lot of debate about self-examination and how do we look at, let's say, the annual 3-year pap smear along with blood-based technologies that can complement some of those, but we do need to understand the numbers are very, very low. We are nowhere near where we need to be, and these are all preventable. There are vaccines available today which women can look at and they can target within the system. We have 2 colleagues who are trained oncologists. I'm not an oncologist, but they will come back and ratify for you that the number of oncologists that we have for every new patient that comes in is far, far too much. You get to the oncology mainstream centers within the country, private or public, they're all overloaded. Because we haven't trained enough of our postgraduates, and we've been relying too much on the super specialists to treat areas where they're not required within that system. They should really come in as experts when we know there are definite therapies to be done. There is so much more that family physicians, general physicians and others can do within the system. And that still remains an issue within the country. So as we look at increasing our numbers and our volumes, in terms of just the number of clinicians or oncologists or doctors that we need, that comes with the issue of cost. And clearly, for a country which is spending less than 2.5% of its GDP on health, we will never have enough in terms of our requirements that we need to really battle something like cancer within the system. But that throws up an opportunity. And the opportunity has been where cost sometimes becomes a constraint. You look at innovations within those mainstreams. And there is enough data to suggest that if you look at appropriate screening, stratified screening, early risk assessment for some of these patients, we look at targeted therapies, we look at therapies which will look at targeting specific cancers at an early stage, the outcomes will certainly be much, much better within that system. So just to go into a background in terms of where we've been involved as an organization within the last few years, for us, we've purely been looking at genomic medicine from that process. We strongly believe that genomic medicine is going to be the future in terms of how we practice healthcare. And this is not going to be only about oncology. This is relating to various fields. This could be about cardiology. This could be about specifics in terms of how we are looking at treating some of those programs. But the mainstay still remains the same. And the mainstay is the fact that 99.9% of all of us are similar. It's the 0.1% which is different, but it's the 0.1% which is different, which is significant when we look at analyzing these genomes. So when the original project started years and years ago within those systems in the late 1990s, it took millions and millions of dollars and over 13 years to assess the first genome. Now it takes a couple of hours. And those costs of millions of dollars have come down to less than about 40,000-50,000 rupees in terms of which is still expensive. We still need to bring it down. If we're going to have our mainstream population using some of these technologies, we really need to bring some of this down within that system. So I'm going to concentrate in the next about 4 or 5 minutes really on talking about precision cancer medicine and precision therapy, and you'll keep on hearing these terms. I'm sure you've been hearing these for a while. Is nothing more than looking at using the right drug and the right dose to the right patient at the right time. That's all that it is. It isn't rocket science. But increasingly, as we start looking at some of the dynamics within the system, we understand from the cancer standpoint that the genome and our genetic makeup how we have our exons within the system, how they're transcribing, how we're looking at the protein delivery mechanisms are critical to how we really look at both addressing cancer as well as managing cancer for preferential outcomes within that system. So of all the people we have in the audience today, how many of you have ever done your own pharmacogenetic analysis? Has anybody done that? Can anybody raise their hands if anybody's done that at all? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to step back from cardiology for a while and just take 2 minutes to explain in terms of how that system works. So all of us within the system metabolize almost about 145 drugs which are validated today by the FDA in terms of some form of a variant with regards to the cytochrome metabolic assessment process. And the second commonest drug which is prescribed in the US is a classical example, which is clopidogrel. So Plavix, which we commonly use for all our cardiovascular patients within the systems, but if you have a CYPC variant which is there in about 15% of the population that exists, you're actually not going to be effectively metabolizing the drug. So the problems relate to the fact that our basic knowledge in terms of even using simple drugs. As a body, why is it that my body works well on dicyclophonac, but maybe my father or my mother, they work better on ibuprofen? And we really haven't taken a lot of time to analyze and assess as to how those variants are taking place. And these are very basics in terms of how we can even start practicing the correct format of medicine within that system and process. So our interest over the last few years has really been looking at blood-based technology. Is it possible for us to look at a small amount of blood from a cancer patient? Can we analyze their DNA and their RNA and from those look at expressing what is the cancer burden, how active is the disease? Are there any specific therapies that can be used for this particular patient? And for a patient who's undergoing therapy, can we look at what is the probability that a recurrence will take place on the drugs that he's taking? Is he resistant to the drugs that are currently being used within that system? Now, traditionally, the way this has always been practiced has been with the use of our standard dynamics, which is the clinician gets involved. We assess in terms of imaging. This could be a CT, could be an MRI, could be a PET scan. We then go for a biopsy. So this is a physical biopsy, an invasive procedure. We're taking out part of the tissue. Now, enough data is telling us from the fact that the tumor itself is extremely heterogeneous. So parts of the tumor from within its space is different to other parts of the tumor or different to its satellites, which may be the metastatic portions of the tumor. So while we may be addressing the tumor with regards to therapy for the primary, we are not individually able to isolate various physical remnants of the tumor from different portions. And this is really where the blood-based technology comes in. So what the blood is doing is that there are fragments of nucleic acids, DNA fragments that are being released not just from the primary but also from the peripheral portions. So this will give you a much better, more of a real-time dynamic in terms of what are the molecular changes going on. Again, we need to understand that these molecular changes are not attributable to all cancers. But there is enough data coming out for most of the solid organ tumor cancers. So if you're talking about head and neck, we're talking about gliomas, we're talking about breast, lung, prostate, colon, female cancers. So it covers majority of the cancers within that process and system. And if you start to look at, can we look at a simple blood-based technology within the system? And if you start looking at a simple blood draw, look at the advantages within the system. Look at the fact that today you have a patient who initially has had some form of a diagnosis. He now needs to come into a particular center, needs to have a biopsy done, needs to have a follow-up scan done. The scan is going to have aspects related to radiation. Here you're looking at a simple 10 ml blood draw. This can be done from the patient's home. This can be done from the doctor's clinic. It can be done from the hospital. So it avoids aspects of looking at unnecessary hospitalization, especially when we're looking at invasive head and neck tumors or brain tumors, where we know the fact that risks related to infection or bleeding as sometimes as high as up to 30%. So these are areas in which you can now look at various fragments, and a liquid biopsy is nothing but looking at various nucleic acid parameters from any parts of the body secretory mechanism. This could be blood, this could be CSF, this could be urine. It could be ascitic fluid, it could be pleural fluid, for example. So a lot of what I'm talking about in terms of the liquid biopsy concept is something which is already there. The FDA approved the first liquid biopsy for lung cancer in June last year. So we now have targeted therapies available for lung cancer, and most of these bodies are now suggesting or recommending for patients who actually come in, rather than looking at an invasive biopsy to take place in these patients, you can actually just take a sample of blood. And if you find a targeted therapy, that is good enough to treat. In case you don't find a driver mutation, the patient should then go in for a biopsy or a physical biopsy. But if you get markers within that system, you've actually saved somebody an unnecessary hospitalization and an unnecessary invasive procedure, which is amenable to risks within the system. So the NCCN guidelines standardly, which is generally accepted, at least amongst the Indian oncology community, they now in fact recommend looking at broad molecular profiling for certain subsets of cancer, especially for lung. But then there are various targeted therapies that are now increasingly available within the ecosystem, which the oncologists can use. So I apologize that you probably will not be able to appreciate and read all the drugs, but the aim of just showing you this slide tells you, and this is from the NCI from about a month back, various subsets of drugs that are today available which are targeted therapies. And what is a targeted therapy? So a targeted therapy largely works by the cytostatic action of working on specific molecular pathways of cancer cells only. When we look at cytotoxic drugs, these are drugs that are going to destroy everything that comes in its way. So these could be normal cells, it could be abnormal cancerous cells, which then directly or indirectly impacts the side effects that patients are getting within the system. Whereas in this particular case, when you're looking at targeted therapies, and these can be available, you can get these through blood, you can get these through tissue, and vast majority of cancers today, whether we're talking about lung cancer or breast cancer or colon cancer or prostate cancer or renal cancer, have targeted therapies now available within the ecosystem. And these are available within that process and that system. So just to share with you in the last 2-3 slides, as we are moving into the new domain in terms of looking at some of these therapies that are coming across, this was an interesting study that was reviewed by ASCO in 2016, where they looked at over 15,000 patients, 50 different tumor types, and what they were trying to do was look at a concordance. So at a time when the patient comes to you, if you take a physical tissue biopsy and at the same time if you take a blood sample, what is the proportion that you will find the same level of mutation? So can you actually look at liquid biopsies substituting the tissue or the tumor within that system? And they actually found a concordance of almost about 87%. This accuracy increased further to about 98% if the samples were taken of blood and tissue within 6 months. And that's not hard to understand. The cancer cells are the smartest buggers we have within the patient's ecosystem. As you start defining a therapy for them, in the next couple of hours, they will start changing different mutations, take a different track into the system, which is why which you find, and the oncologists will validate that when they have their talk, that invariably the initial responses to some of these patients are very, very good. However, when we look across the board for most of the solid organ tumor cancers, the success rate is less than 25% within the system, because the patients will initially respond and then new mutations kick in, which make the viability or the responsiveness to those drugs much, much less within the system. So earlier in the year, MD Anderson has now started accepting, so just giving you a flavor of globally what's out there within the ecosystem. So MD Anderson, start of the year, has adopted the concept of liquid biopsy as a standard of care. So they're going to use this across the system to try and identify simplified diagnostics for their patients, aligning them to driving some of these guidelines. One of the issues that we face when we come across some of the newer technologies is a lot of doctors, and rightfully so, will come back and say, well, show me the evidence, show me where it is in the guidelines, and then we will make it happen. But we're into a stage, we're into a process where the learning within this domain of science and technology is very, very upstream. Things are changing very rapidly, very fast. The amount of drugs that have been approved by the FDA for lung cancer in the last 3 to 4 years is more than what they were approved in the last 45 years, for example. So that's where this is moving to. So will liquid biopsy be able to change the dynamics in terms of replacing conventional biopsy? So if you're looking for a histopathological diagnosis, then no. A liquid biopsy is not looking at histology within the system, but the way the science is heading today, I think we are probably within about the next 7 to 10 years away, where we will no longer define tumors or cancers by their anatomical site. So it will no longer be about the fact that we are talking about a breast cancer or a melanomas cancer, or we're talking about a prostate cancer. We're going to be talking about defining mutation-centric or mutation-based tumors. So if I have an EGFR variant mutation tumor that's going on, if I'm going to look at a TKI therapy, it doesn't really matter whether the tumor is in the lung or in my toe. It will work, because it's targeting those mutations, and as those mutations change, we will work into the new spectrum of those systems. So from a liquid biopsy concept, do we know it all today? No, we don't. There's a significant amount of learning and upstroking that's currently still happening within the ecosystem, but let's at least understand it is a simple blood draw. It's nothing more than that. We're just taking a simple sample of blood. The way you would look at defining an annual cholesterol program for a cardiovascular patients, it's gone through a significant amount of validation, and at least for some of the cancers, we have good data globally. Is that data acceptable to Indian standards? We don't know. We still need to create data. As I started off my discussion initially, we are a data-deprived country. Even when we look at basic programs, this is for us, in terms of when we talk about, let's say, breast self-examination for women, we are largely attributing data which looks at in the West to say, does a mammogram actually help in terms of outcomes? Do we actually start diagnosing more patients who actually don't need active therapy, and does it help them in that system? Well, we can't even extrapolate that data for India because we don't have that data at a national level. We have pockets of data coming in from various centers, and I think the time is there where we actually need to relook at how we align some of those data points within the system. So just to come back and conclude, advances in technology are ongoing. I think we are way off in terms of pace, in terms of even trying to assess where some of them are. Maybe these are not the technologies we want to focus on immediately, just with the challenges we have as a country. But I think if we focus on awareness education, both for patients as well as for our clinicians, if you have patients who come in who have hereditary cancers, if you have a mechanism by which you can counsel some of those patients through appropriately trained genetic counselors, that's probably the best service one can give. I know doctors everywhere across the ecosystem, including myself when I was actively practicing, we were overloaded and overworked, and we didn't have enough time to talk to our patients, and I don't think that has changed. So we do need experts to come in who can appropriately counsel, talk to the patient, explain to them what are the benefits, what are the limitations of some of these new technologies that are ongoing. I do believe that genomics is going to seriously challenge clinicians in terms of the way we practice medicine or the way we've practiced medicine. While the goal still remains curative and to cure patients within the system, I think as an intermediate step, if we can, for our patients, improve their survivorship, but improve their survivorship not at the cost of psycho-emotive and social challenges. There's no point giving 6 months to a patient if he's going to spend 3 months of that back and forth into a hospital. Adds very little value to that system. And as I mentioned, we don't know it all. I think the science is still very, very upstream, and hopefully in a couple of years, Zia can invite us back and we'll be able to provide you an upload of at least where we'll move to as a country. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions at the end of the session.